What still fits? What still fits? Let me try that again. What still fits after coming to Christ? That's a question that I'm exploring. I'm exploring that question. What still fits in my life after coming to Jesus, after coming to Christ? um, I, I don't know. I don't know. Like I say, it's an open exploration. And what I mean by that is, um, how much of the old ways, how much of my old ideas, behaviors, patterns, practices, etc., how much of that life still makes sense in this context. Excuse me. And I've got to be careful. I've got to be, let's see, how do I want to say this? Because there's a feeling and a tendency, I think, a feeling that I have of just totally throwing everything out. In the rush to do it right, in the rush to do a good job. Funny as that sounds, but in the rush to be faithful or to whatever. That it needs to be a wholesale change in everything I do, everything I am, etc. Wholesale renovation. And a part of that, I have to say, is this kind of zealous, puritanical streak that I have that is kind of perfectionistic, that is fear-driven, that is connected to OCD, connected to perfectionism, anxiety, etc. And that's like a handicap that I have to always account for and sort of correct for. It's like I have this thing that skews me in one direction, and I sort of have to be aware of it and sort of correct for it. That I can very easily become rigid, dogmatic, controlling, I guess. Although it doesn't really feel like the right. Rigid feels like a better word. Oh, what the hell? Controlling. We'll just say it. I can become very out of balance, rigid, zealous, etc. And I want to live, the highest. I want to live the highest. I want to live surrendered to God. And yet it's like there's a danger there for me. I think for probably many people, especially because we have access to the whole spectrum of Jesus followership, Christendom, of Christianity, of all the different ways to walk. And in the same way, maybe not exactly the same, but in a similar way, let's say, that you can start to explore like a political affiliation, and very quickly, if you're not careful, and even if you are sometimes, because of something like the algorithm with YouTube or other generating content publishing housing sites, YouTube. I'm guessing TikTok, Facebook. I don't spend any time on TikTok or Instagram, but Facebook a little bit. But anyways, that you can kind of quickly radicalize and go to the extremes. Let's step outside of Christianity or religion right now, but politically that's pretty well attested to, documented at this point. That movement, from becoming just a little bit curious about, if it's the left side of the spectrum, liberal politics, and just kind of increasingly moving in a farther and farther left, progressive, identitarian, extreme activist. It can get pretty far off into the whatever, la la land, into lefty lunacy, let's just say. I don't know the best way to describe it, but and on the right, different content, of course, different values in some senses, but a similar trajectory or a similar pattern can be observed, where you start off exploring, conservative ideals, or maybe, just to keep it, I guess, simple, conservative ideals, and can move further and further right into more and more extreme, narrow, rigid, ideologically fixated positions. So something like that can happen, I think, to just about anybody, and happens to a lot of us. And with Christianity, sure. With following Jesus, sure. Because there are so many expressions and flavors. And even though there is sort of this inbuilt safety guardrail, course correction mechanism about the reality, about what am I trying to say here? The theological perspective that it's not a works-based religion primarily. And I know that's a big conversation, and we get into Protestant, Catholic, and all that stuff. And to be honest and to be fair, my reading of the Bible so far is you can find a little bit of support for both. You can find a little bit of support for, obviously doing good works. It's not so dichotomous, I don't think, as we're led to believe, but there certainly is there is emphasis on God's love, God's forgiveness, God's peace, God's mercy, God's redemption, God's salvation, etc., being a gift. That grace plays a major role here. Okay, so there is that guardrail, and kind of like should be a foundational safety, inbuilt safety mechanism for us in thinking about this. But and even Paul, in some of his writings, if I'm remembering right, talks a lot about the overly religious, legalistic mindset. And you hear people, I hear people talk about that, especially in certain videos I watch, talk about the dangers of becoming religious, the dangers of becoming legalistic, and and so Paul talks, I think, in pretty shocking terms. I have to go through and reread again, but about the law and the radical transformation that Jesus brought to the world, especially in that dimension. But yeah, Jesus himself, always what is the term? Gadfly, thorn in the side, in a sense, metaphorically, of the religious of his day, of those who were blinded by zeal, blinded by dogmatic adherence to the law. And so that, and that's a good thing. But But nonetheless, human nature, we're tribal. I don't know if I want to bring that into this part. Human nature, nonetheless, it's there is that within us that where where a healthy love of devotion, a healthy devotion, a healthy love um, of the vehicle of spirituality, which is religion, which is church. There's something very healthy about that, and you have to be grateful that a mystery and a grace, that we know about Jesus, we know about his life because of the ways that it was codified throughout history, the ways that his life and his teachings were codified, and that is the church. That is all the, theologians throughout time, the writings of the church fathers. And I'm speaking a little bit past my knowledge set here, so forgive me, but I don't think that's controversial to say. And so you're grateful for that. And there's a beauty, of course, the way that it brings a community together to have certain rituals and a communal way to connect to God. And so please, this is multifaceted, and it depends on what altitude, in a sense, you're speaking from, where it's healthy, where it's unhealthy. But there's that tendency within us to become overly pious, to become overly fixated on the ritual, to become very narrowly theologically identified. I just mean with, our particular flavor of Christianity, our particular interpretation. These are just, some things I observe. And I guess, there is that tribal aspect in human consciousness. In other words, one way to kind of just clarify all this, I think about, is when I get in front of Jesus Christ, and God willing, Lord, may you grant me an audience in this life that I might have a visionary experience and meet the risen Christ embodied, like Thomas, or like so many people that have had visions and had interactions. You could say mystical experiences, however you want to think about it. Lord, grant me that grace. It'd be amazing to speak to Jesus face to face. But I just can't imagine, to put it kind of absurdly, him saying, had you gone Baptist instead of Presbyterian, you would have made it into heaven. I think when you kind of put it at that level, I just can't imagine Jesus Christ, who, let's be real, had never heard of Presbyterians, had never heard of Catholics, had never heard of Baptists, had never heard of non-denoms. Sorry, that word just is funny to me. He'd never heard of any of that, because he is the church, he is he is the Christ, he is, anyways, he is Jesus. That I need to pray a certain amount of time. This is moral scrupulosity. Religious scrupulosity is another term for this. You can really kind of find yourself going down that road pretty easily, trying to please God, trying to prove yourself to God, trying to do it right, trying to and so that's a danger. And the whole, to kind of bring it back around, the whole thing for me is like, I've been doing some deliverance prayer. There's a guy that I've been, as a group, and just and other avenues, deliverance prayer, because I've got some challenges that I'm working through. And it can get really kind of nutty, squirrely, weird. in the sense of you can get real paranoid about how much you have to excise from your life. And please have grace if you're here, if you're listening to this, with how I'm speaking this, because this is, again, fraught territory. Just trying to be kind of plain spoken as best I can. But you can get real paranoid about, something like idols. Let's just be concrete here. That I have to go through, rummage through, all of a sudden I've got this kind of suspicious eye on every object in my house, Um, is this potentially a gateway to sin? Is this potentially a gateway to negative influence, evil influence, etc.? And some of that makes sense, and certainly there's a lot of biblical support. I'm reading through Isaiah right now, chapter 44, 45, and he's really inveighing against idols. It's very biblical and getting, very specific about, well, I guess it's God coming through, his prophetic voice. It's the Lord speaking, but, and there's a wisdom there too, but it's like, yeah, I've got a few, I got rid of some things just in the spirit of this. Like I had some crystals and things, which I never really believed in anyway. That's a whole long story. So I was kind of glad to get rid of that crap anyways. Um, I'm happy just with Jesus. I'm happy just with God. I don't really need I don't need like the material trappings, not at all. I guess that's a very Protestant sensibility, kind of implicit in the way I feel about things. But like I've got a few little rugs that kind of have Native American patterns, or Native American-esque style design in this place that I'm renting. Again, I'm just trying to be concrete here so you know what I'm getting at. And so now I'm like paranoid, like, is that a stronghold for the enemy? Because those are here, because certain objects can be cursed and open doorways to demonic influence, etc. And I'm not even totally against that in principle, that idea. I've just seen so much, and I know, this is not a rant against extrasensory dimensions, let's say supernatural dimensions. Not at all. Not at all. What we see, feel, hear, touch, taste, etc. in this life, in this waking reality, that's just one part of a much vaster creation. So I'm not against that part. I think is is the least controversial part about following Jesus, reading the Bible, etc. Supernatural dimension. That's not a confusion for me. But I don't know. You just start to get very brittle and kind of fragile, and it's like you're in other people's houses, that should I not hang out with people who don't have the right objects in their house? It's Native American art, if it's feathers, if it's crystals, if it's New Age, if it's whatever. I don't know. I just don't want to live that way. I've lived under the tyranny of so many kind of false ideologies and rigid ideologies, and doing my best to be the exemplar of the ideology. This has shades of that, and I just don't want to go down that road. And so that's that's just one example. But I can expand that out to, content that I watch. It's like, who fits now for me? Music that I listen to. creators like on YouTube, for example. There's this guy that well, I don't want to get too specific on that, but and I will say this, the path is the path of holiness, and I desperately want greater and greater holiness in my life. Um, but that's God that will do that, is my sense of it. It's not me. It's not this little self here. And carefully curating every moment of my life, it just is exhausting. Um, like I was at work. Yeah, I mean, work is another example. There's so much vulgarity and just not very good stuff, content of people's conversations and music in the back, music that people listen to, and language and content of conversations. And again, it's like you go too far down this piety path. I'm using piety as a little bit of a negative, as a little bit of a pejorative in the context of what I'm talking about right now. It's not really. I mean, it's good to be pious and have reverence and etc. But in this world, you will be miserable. You'll just be miserable. And I'm finding that within myself, that I have to be very careful, because I'm playing with fire here, because I already have such a predisposition towards scrupulosity and towards perfectionism. And I want to feel like I've learned something from all the counterfeit spirituality and counterfeit ideology that I've fallen into in my life, that some of that is translatable here, that I don't have to be just a nut, that God loves me, that it's okay. I don't have to be perfect, of course, but I also don't have to go around putting the world to rights. That's not me. That's not my job. I'm just not going to do it. I'm just not going to do it. That's not me now, and that's not ever going to be me. And what drives it is this feeling of like, I have to work for my salvation. I have to save the world, and you won't be able to do that. You just won't. How I'm seeing it now is you trust in God and you relax. It's like the opposite direction, rather than this more and more frantic attempt to fit into an ill-fitting suit of what you should be. It's more like, just relax, just relax, just relax. Turn it over to God. Let God guide you through love, through healing, through peace. Let God speak to you that way. Say, God, show me your love first and foremost. And I'm bold enough to say that and feel that more and more. In part because a lot of the testimonies that I've seen, where it wasn't like these people got their act together, the people giving a testimony, it wasn't like they got everything perfect, dotted all their I's, crossed all their religious T's. No, it was God showed up, filled them with grace, delivered them, healed them, loved them. And that love and that buoyancy started to unlock the path, that protection, that safety. Because when it's you out there, you against the world, you fighting for your salvation, it's a very scary, lonely, exhausting place to be. Very, frightening, insecure, lonely. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and the rest shall be added unto you, unto thee. Seek God first, seek God's righteousness, seek God, and move from that space. That's what's different about the walk, is that it's God, not you, that's guiding, calling the shots. And that's good. That's really good. Because I don't know. I don't know how to do this, any of this. I don't know how to do this. So I just keep giving it over to God, asking God, show me, guide me, protect me, heal me. Fuel me with your love. If it's coming to me, something that I have to do, I've had all these OCD compulsions, and part of that dance is like anxiety hits, you get fixated, you get obsessed on something, your nervous system goes haywire. It's like a feeling, an embodied, awful feeling of panic, anxiety, dysregulation, and this demand, this command that comes through. This is what you got to do. In other words, the compulsion, the demand of the compulsion. You have to do X, whatever the compulsive action or behavior or thought pattern, whatever. And that will be the thing that brings you relief from this anxiety. It's like the OCD causes the problem, the anxiety, and then comes in like the hero. Oh, and here's your solution. It's like, just don't cause the problem to begin with. Leave me the hell alone, But and it's not a real solution when you follow the compulsion. And I've had so many different themes, but the underlying texture of it is fear, anxiety, fear, and it can take on God's voice. It can take on a feeling of God's voice. I'm doing this to please God, to prove myself to God, to be right with God. And very explicitly so, like I've had confession patterns. Oof, those are brutal. The ones that involve other people are just so brutal, because it's like OCD is expanding the field of destruction and devastation and out into the world. If it's just a private compulsion, that's hell. That's also hell. The whole thing is hell. It's hell all the way through. But it's got a little bit narrower of a field of impact, so to speak. But yeah, confession themes, confrontation themes where I have to confront people over stuff as a way to like prove myself to God, to be right, to be aligned. Anyways, it's all fear-based, Apologizing themes, it's kind of a cluster of different ones. And so those are, it's like I have to course correct throughout this whole process and be careful that those tendencies within me don't hijack the path, hijack the process, hijack God's voice. But yeah, I take comfort, especially in those testimonies where God showed up and loved on somebody, and that transformed them. Met them where they were at and loved on them. And so that's my prayer. That's what I ask. God would show up and love on me, let's say. And from that, the rest would fall into place. And from that perspective, there's a joy that's possible in ritual, in tradition, in something like church, in different prayers, different practices, rosary or whatever, So what fits? That's, I guess, the theme I'm exploring here. And and that's what I wanted to say is I think from that love, what fits, the stuff that doesn't fit more naturally just kind of falls away. It's not this anxious preoccupation with shutting all the doors to the enemy like playing whack-a-mole or something. No, I think it's more the love heals you. The more healed you are, the less crutches, the less dependencies, the more free you are, the less, addictions. That stuff is there in your life because you're wounded. And it's a form, it's kind of a tragic, misguided form of self-medication. So, in a sense, when the real medication, the love comes online, the relationship with God comes online. Let's say when the love comes online, that stuff starts to naturally fall away because the wound that it was connected to starts to get some love. And so you may just naturally not want to watch the same things, listen to the same things, speak in the same ways, do the same evil things, wicked things, bad things. That there's a health that can come through. That said, I'm finding a little bit of grace and a little bit of space to not, because it's like, do I only now listen to Christian music? Do I only now consume Christian content? Can I list? Can I watch things and beyond that scope? I think so. I mean, that could be opening Pandora's box, but there's like a temperance and a moderation, and you have to be self-aware. But there's a lot of stuff out there that's, I don't think, detrimental to your soul that isn't explicitly Jesus. And that you can find wisdom and interesting things, and you know now is partying, doing drugs, drinking, sexual uh, my brain's tired, hooking up with people, porn, etc. Is that all compatible with leading a holy life? No, of course not. Of course not. Of course not. Of course not. Now, find things that are wholesome and good, but you don't have to. You can take on this kind of false piety, and it becomes kind of a false smile, kind of a rigidity, And I don't think it's about that. I don't think it works at that level. Consume things that nourish and feed your soul. And I'm saying this as somebody who has noticed myself drifting in that direction of becoming overly religious quickly. Not that it's gotten to any extremes, but I can just see myself starting down that path. And because I have had experience in life, I can kind of recognize that pattern and say, I don't think that's right. And just continue to surrender to God. If that is right, God, if these are the things you want out of my life, great. But show me. Show me that it's you talking, and not the anxiety, and not the fear, not the scrupulosity, and not the devil, not, not anxiety, not fear, etc. Let me hear it from you, and let me feel the love in it, and show me, Lord. Fill me with your spirit, that you want me to do X. So, may it be so, Lord, may it be so. Amen.